Today we are going to tell you the story of a very powerful political leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Remember to click subscribe and like if you haven't done so, then we continue with the talk. The full story of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, second supreme leader of Iran. Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, Persian, is one of the most powerful and controversial figures in contemporary Middle Eastern politics. His rise from a religious student in Mashhad to the presidency of the Islamic Republic, and then almost 4 decades as Iran's supreme leader shaped the trajectory of modern Iran, its domestic politics, regional ambitions, and role on the global stage. Ali Khamenei has stood at the heart of the Islamic Republic since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, playing a pivotal role in both the militarization of the state and the consolidation of near-absolute authority in the office of the supreme leader. He is the architect of the rise of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, shaping it into an instrument of control and regional influence, and has made Iran's nuclear capabilities central to its strategy for national security and deterrence. As a pragmatic hardliner, he has sidelined leftists, moderate clerics, and dissidents, while occasionally loosening his grip when regime legitimacy or cohesion has been at stake. Through a steady centralization of power over 4 decades, beginning as a trusted confidant of Ruhollah Khomeini and member of the Revolutionary Council, followed by a 2-term presidency from 1981 to 1989, and culminating in his elevation to supreme leader despite lacking formal qualifications, Khamenei has shaped Iran's revolutionary regime in his image. On December 28, 2025, protests broke out against the dire economic situation in Iran, spurred in part by decades of hawkish posturing under Khamenei that led some of the strongest world economies to sanction Iran. The protests spread rapidly and, with encouragement from the United States, threatened to force Khamenei from power, some 37 years after he had taken the reins. Some of the protesters even called for the return of Reza Pahlavi, whose father, also 37 years into his reign, was replaced by Ruhollah Khamenei, and other revolutionaries in the Islamic Revolution in 1979. A cleric of high institutional rank among the 12 Shia, Khamenei is generally addressed with the honorific Ayatollah, a title that is known to belong to more than 100 other living Shia clerics. His formal title as Iran's political head of state is Rahbar, meaning leader or supreme leader. Revolutionary role and presidency. Khamenei was born on April 19, 1939, in the city of Mashhad, an important religious center for the 12 Shia as the burial place of the 8th Imam al-Ri. He later began his advanced religious studies at Qom under the most prominent Shia scholars of the day, including Ruhollah Khomeini. From 1963 he was actively involved in protests against the monarchy, for which he was imprisoned several times by Iran's security services. Khamenei remained closely associated with the exiled Khomeini during this time, and immediately after the latter's return to Iran in 1979 was appointed to the Revolutionary Council. After its dissolution, he became Deputy Minister of Defense and Khomeini's personal representative on the Supreme Defense Council. For a brief period he commanded the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. A foreign policy hawk, he was a key negotiator in the Iran hostage crisis. Khamenei was immersed in the new republic's politics from the start. A fiery orator in support of Khomeini and an ardent advocate of the concept of Vilayat-e-Faqih, governance by the religious jurist, Khamenei was among the founding members of the Loyalist Islamic Republican Party, IRP. He was injured in 1981 in one of a series of terrorist bombings that devastated the IRP's upper echelon. Following the death of President Mohammad Ali Rajai and the IRP's Secretary General in another such blast later that year, Khamenei was appointed as the IRP's Secretary General. Within weeks he became the IRP's candidate for the presidency, an office that had previously been off-limits for clergy. Khamenei was elected president in October 1981 and re-elected in 1985. The presidency was a largely ceremonial role during his 2 terms, most executive authority being vested in the prime minister. After his own nominee for prime minister was rejected by the left-leaning Majlis, parliament, he reluctantly appointed Mir Hossein Mousavi as prime minister with the urging of Khomeini himself. The relationship between Khamenei and Mousavi was bitter, leading them to butt heads both during and after Khamenei's presidency. Second leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran as Khomeini's health declined, and it remained unclear who would be both qualified to succeed him and sympathetic to his vision of Vilayat-e-Faqih. In 1989 he appointed a council to revise the constitution. Its work had not been completed by the time of his death in June, and it appointed Khamenei as the next Rahbar or leader. However, Khamenei did not meet the qualifications. He was not yet a senior cleric, having been accorded only the somewhat less lofty title of Hojatolslam. Moreover, he favored a strongly centralized government under the leader, in part to forestall the influence of foreign powers in domestic politics. Changes to the constitution, approved in a referendum in July, loosened the qualifications, eliminated the post of prime minister and strengthened the presidency, and gave the leader significant power to oversee and intervene in political affairs. Intervention in Iranian democracy in the early 1990s. Khamenei enjoyed a good working relationship with President Hashemi Rafsanjani, another revolutionary figure with whom he was close. His relations with reformist President Mohammad Khatami, however, who served from 1997 to 2005, were strained. Against Khamenei's conservatism and deep distrust of the United States, Khatami had a liberalizing agenda and favored rapprochement with the United States. Although Khamenei projected an official neutrality in the 2005 presidential elections, he showed subtle favor for conservative candidates, and his son Mojtaba was alleged to have played a role in the surprise victory of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, a relatively unknown conservative former mayor of Tehran. Many found Ahmadinejad's success surprising, and it was clear that he would not have been elected without their support. During his first term in office, Ahmadinejad endeared himself to Khamenei through his bellicose stance toward opponents, both at home and abroad, particularly by flaunting the nation's nuclear program. Nonetheless, the two at times found themselves at odds, particularly as they engaged in a power struggle in Ahmadinejad's second term. Khamenei's leadership saw its strongest challenge during the presidential election of 2009, when Ahmadinejad faced a surprisingly formidable opponent in Mousavi, Khamenei's former prime minister, 1981–89, around whom the country's reformist contingent had coalesced. Although pre-election polls had shown a tight contest, Ahmadinejad was declared the victor with more than 60% of the vote, and the result was quickly endorsed by Khamenei. Suspecting fraud, the opposition rejected the result and gathered to protest, staging massive popular demonstrations in Tehran and elsewhere. In some instances, protesters shouted slogans calling for Khamenei's downfall. In the media, the protests were dubbed the Green Movement, after the color associated with Mousavi's campaign. Although the first protests were largely peaceful, police and paramilitary groups were deployed to suppress them. A handful of protesters and members of the opposition were killed, and many more were arrested. Following nearly a week of protests, Khamenei issued his first public response to the unrest, again supporting Ahmadinejad's victory and warning the opposition against further demonstrations. Despite the government's attempts at suppression, protests continued for the rest of the year. Relations between Khamenei and Ahmadinejad soured during the latter's second term as president. It was believed that Ahmadinejad was trying to wrest power from the clerical establishment. Tensions came into public view in April 2011, when Ahmadinejad refused to report to cabinet meetings or his presidential office for 11 days after Khamenei vetoed his dismissal of the Minister of Intelligence. He returned to work under the threat of impeachment. Ahmadinejad took another provocative step in May, when he named himself acting Minister of Oil before the clerical establishment could intervene. In March 2012, Ahmadinejad was summoned by the Majlis for an unprecedented session of questioning over his policies and his power struggles with Khamenei. Ahmadinejad finished his term in 2013 but was barred from running again in 2017. Iran's nuclear program and international isolation under Ahmadinejad's successor, the centrist cleric Hassan Rouhani, Iran changed direction in foreign affairs, moving rapidly toward reducing friction with the West. International negotiations toward an agreement to end Iran's nuclear research programs in exchange for the lifting of sanctions began within several months of Rouhani's election in 2013. Throughout the negotiation process, Khamenei maintained a skeptical public posture, voicing objections about aspects of the agreement that he saw as possible infringements on Iran's sovereignty. Nevertheless, a final agreement, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, was reached in 2015 with Khamenei's approval. Rouhani won re-election in 2017 in a landslide, but the benefits of lifted sanctions and resolution of the nuclear issue were short-lived. After many Iranians failed to see much relief in their everyday lives, demonstrations broke out in December 2017. They took aim not only at Rouhani but at Khamenei as well. The situation worsened in May 2018 when U.S. President Donald Trump announced that the United States was withdrawing from the nuclear agreement and would reimpose sanctions. Despite Iranian compliance with the deal, Trump argued that the deal did not do enough to constrain Iran. In August, as the first set of sanctions went into force, Khamenei rebuked Rouhani for having conceded too much in the arrangements of the 2015 agreement. Nonetheless, he dismissed calls for Rouhani to step down. Rouhani's policy of rapprochement now appeared to be over, and Iran returned to the virulent display of military development that Khamenei had long favored. This display was condemned by other signatories of the nuclear deal, who had pledged active support to maintain the deal despite U.S. withdrawal in 2019. As the renewed sanctions continued to bite and it was becoming apparent that the other signatories were unable to guarantee Iran the benefits of the deal, Khamenei sought a more aggressive government stance in facing the crisis. He categorically rejected renegotiating the agreement with the U.S., backed a gradual breach of the deal, and engaged in hawkish rhetoric. In November, as protests erupted across Iran against a government decision to raise fuel prices, Khamenei ordered a crackdown and dismissed the protesters as thugs. Meanwhile, unrelated protests in neighboring Iraq took aim at Iran, burning down its consulate in Najaf and the U.S. 1. Early life and background, 1939 to 1960. Ali Khamenei was born on April 19, 1939, in the city of Mashhad in northeastern Iran, one of Sharia Islam's most significant religious centers and the burial place of Imam Ali al-Reza. He came from a religious family. His ancestors were devout clerics and scholars within Twelver Shi'ism, which profoundly influenced his worldview. From age 4, he began traditional Islamic schooling in a maktab khana, religious elementary education, and advanced through formal education before entering the seminary in Qom, the heartland of Shi'i religious study in Iran. There, young Ali studied under several influential scholars, including Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who would later lead the 1979 revolution in Qom. Khamenei learned advanced Islamic jurisprudence, philosophy, and theology, the disciplines that would anchor his political ideas, especially the doctrine of Vilayat-e-Faqih, guardianship of the Islamic jurist, which justifies clerical rule over the state. 2. Activism against the Shah, 1960s-1978. In the 1960s, Iran was under the rule of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a monarch heavily aligned with the United States and Western powers, pursuing rapid modernization and secularization known as the White Revolution. Many religious elements opposed these reforms, seeing them as a threat to Islamic identity and clerical authority. Khamenei became politically active against the Shah's regime beginning in the early 1960s. He criticized the monarchy for corruption, suppression of religious practices, Western influence, and political repression. As a consequence of his activism, Khamenei was arrested and imprisoned multiple times by SAVAK, the Shah's feared security service. The conflict with Iraq consumed Iranian politics and society in the 1980s. Khamenei was a tireless advocate of defense, framing the war in religious and nationalist terms. His leadership during this period solidified his credentials among hardliners who saw resistance as a spiritual and political duty. Relations with Prime Minister Mousavi during his presidency. Khamenei clashed with Prime Minister Mir Hossein Mousavi, whose reformist views and approach to governance sometimes conflicted with Khamenei's hardline conservatism. Their rivalry foreshadowed later political tensions within Iran's political elite. 5. Becoming supreme leader, 1989. Unexpected successor. When Ayatollah Ali Khamenei died